What's up, everybody? Welcome to Theory Underground. We're about to get this thing started. I hope I'm coming through loud and clear. Go ahead and let me know in the live chat if it's not coming through properly. I'll get things taken care of before we actually get going here. But I'm about to bring on Mikey and Todd. We're going to be having a conversation about getting into Lacan and reading Seminar 11, which is the best place to begin when it comes to all things Lacan, and you'll find out why here today. Couldn't be more excited about it. But with that, I'm going to roll a PSA and we'll be right back after this message. All I'll tell you about this message is it's a PSA for the course that began last week, the first lecture of which is live and publicly available here on the Theory Underground media arm on YouTube and podcast too. Okay, enjoy. The program will resume shortly, right after this DIY commercial that is not for any sponsor other than ourselves. Thank you for watching.
Whether we are already fully in the grip of the techno-capital AI singularity or not, we likely feel as though there's not much we can do.
As allies of future generations, we aren't giving up so easily.
To quote the author of Manifesto, the Mad Farmer Liberation Front, we wake in the night at the least sound in fear of what our life and our children's lives may be.
This fear is not new. The question of technology, media, and institutions became unavoidable in the 20th century. Yet when we think of institutions, the most radical critiques people have encountered came from either Michel Foucault or Jürgen Habermas. These thinkers towered over the theory scene in the 1970s and 80s as radicals took their long march through the institutions.
When it comes to theories of social change, the tendency is to put our hopes in leaving the existing institutions, the current order failing, or some overnight revolution to bring us salvation. Otherwise, we lean in and do the best we can with what's afforded by the existing institutions. Reform or revolution. Nothing ever changes, so we keep putting our hopes in education.
So progressives say, if only more people had access to better education, then that would solve the problems. But they have not thought seriously enough about the nature of our institutions, or this thing called education that they offer.
The most radical critiques of schooling that teachers encounter issue from Paulo Freire, Bell Hooks, and Henry Giraud. But none of these ever got to the root of institutions themselves. The theorist who did this was Ivan Illich.
Gaining brief stardom in the 70s, Ivan Illich was the father of the deschooling movement, inspiring hundreds of radical schools and generations of homeschooling parents. But this characterization of his work as the anti-school guy was his ultimate demise, for that only takes account of a surface level of his work. Illich was immediately misunderstood and quickly abandoned.
The issue goes far beyond schools. We spend our entire lives mediated through institutions that totalize, instrumentalize, and reduce humans, all of our possibilities, to something predictable, calculable, and exchangeable, easy to control. The interests of state and capital here overlap entirely. Our desires are thus turned into commodities and our time energy into labor power. Illich doesn't stop here, though, for institutions are not the whole picture.
When people think of schooling today, they think of studying for exams, not learning for the sake of learning. When people think of hospitals, they think of treating illnesses, not human-to-human care and well-being. When people think of transportation, they think of speed and efficiency, not the possibility of sustained, regular, and meaningful connections. When people think of reading, they think of collecting information, not lingering with an idea. The move from schooling to scolae requires serious inquiry into the conditions of possibility for this mode.
I'm calling for a sincere and earnest revival of Illich. While most introductions to Illich limit their engagement to his earlier works, a series of polemics against schooling and institutionalized consumer society, I want to go deeper and lead us to a more robust understanding of who and what a human is for Illich. With his help, we will reopen the question of what we are, what we can be, and the types of lives we are willing to give our time and energy to bring into being, if there are to be humans in the future.
This course begins on June 13th and goes through July 4th, 2024. It meets on Thursdays at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. You can enroll at theoryunderground.com/courses/Illich-1, or just click on the link in the description. For those who just want to spend a month really thinking about schooling and institutions, this is a fantastic way to do so. But for those who are looking to go deeper with a community of truth seekers who are going beyond the current theory scene to form an intellectual milieu, this is a fantastic way to do so, because the Theory Underground 2024 conference at the end of October 23rd through 27th is going to have special panels for presentations related to this course. Any student of this course will have opportunities to present, and those presentations can ultimately culminate in submissions that may be accepted into the anthology we are doing on the critique of schooling and education, to be published either at the end of this year or at the beginning of 2025.
Thank you.
We hope to see you there. All right, everybody, welcome back to Theory Underground. What you just saw was a commercial for the course that began this month. But what we're about to do is have a conversation with Todd McGowan about the course that starts next month. But first of all, let's say the thing that Mikey started off saying when we were in the backside of here, which is what? Happy Name of the Father Day, Todd. Great to have you. How you doing?
I'm good. Good to see you, Dave. Good to see you, Mikey.
Same.
So we want to talk about a bunch of different things. Mikey's got a whole list, of course. I guess I want to first of all, let everybody kind of know though, we're doing this here, and you're not going to be shouting this out anywhere. And I wanted everyone to know that's nothing personal, right? So you want to explain your principled position?
Yeah, it's nothing personal at all, Dave. And in fact, I violated my principle for you on the last. I was on a podcast, and I'm like, well, I'm doing this thing on Seminar 11 at Theory Underground. So yeah, I try not to on Why Theory advertise myself. That's like I don't say like, oh, I've got this book published, you should go buy it. I don't say so. Actually, I don't mind advertising you. I just don't want to advertise myself. So that's the long and the short of it. So I really feel like we don't have a Patreon, we don't have anything for Why Theory, and my YouTube things have no. I make I don't know. I think I make a kind of obscene salary as a professor. I mean, other people might think it's not that obscene, but it's enough. So I'm not gonna. I just feel like this is a way that I can. I don't do any charity work, so this is not my thing, because I don't interact with people so well. So so this is kind of what I do. So yeah, so I can't charge, and I can't advertise. I don't advertise. So that's it. Sorry. But yeah, that's why. It's absolutely not personal today. It's personal about myself, not about Dave. Theory Underground, which I'm a total supporter of, and talk up whenever I get the chance. So that's a fact. So.
Well, somehow, even without you shouting it out almost anywhere, we've still gotten more signups than we usually have at this point. So I think there's a lot of people kind of chomping at the bit, pretty excited to be a part of this course. We've got a bunch of them probably in the chat right now. Go ahead and let yourselves, introduce yourselves if you want, if you're in the chat and you're going to be a part of this course. But with that, Mikey, how you doing? And what do you want to talk about here?
I mean, yeah, like, I mean, basically we're doing this to basically serve as a introduction to what Todd's going to be teaching in the course, and that is seminar 11. And so obviously a lot of people, if you're spent time in the theory world, you know that this is arguably Lacan's most important text, most important seminar. Most Lacanians end up coming to have a favorite one besides this, but
Mhm.
I think it's important to understand why this is the go-to tech. Like, you can't start with the stuff in the Acree. You know, it's really hard to find the inroad to Lacanian theory written by Lacan himself. There's lots of
Mhm.
great books that serve as introductory text to Lacan, but the question is, like, where does somebody go to learn how to read Lacan for themselves? I just think Seminar 11 is still the gold standard for that. I mean, Seminar 7's very readable in ways and stuff, but um, the and I'm gonna let Todd take it and say. All I'll say is I think what's so important about this is even though it's his 11th seminar, it's kind of a reboot for him,
Mhm.
right? And that's what makes him go back to the four fundamental concepts of psychoanalysis. Is, you know, he's teaching at a new institute. Um, it's almost a fresh start. So, um, Todd, what do you think? Why do you think this one is such is so beloved and so influential, and why it's the best place to start with Lacan?
Well, I think you just said it. It's a reboot. He was thrown out of the Hôpital Sainte Anne because he was no longer in the International Psychoanalytic Association for a practical, not a theoretical reason. So because he gave these short sessions that violated their rules, and then they're like, you stop doing that or you're out. And he's like, I'm not stopping, and you're out. And so then he lost his ability to teach at St. Anne. And so that he was home. The seminar was basically homeless. He had already started a seminar called Late. It's interesting you mentioned it's Father's Day in America. He started a seminar called Le Nom du Père, the name. It can be the nose of the father, not nose Nose, but the No apostrophe, the nose of the father, or the name of the father in French. And he started that. He only gave one seminar of it, and Jacqueline Miller has actually put that together with some other texts and published it under it's just called The Name of the Father, and it's actually translated into English, I think. Uh, so that's this interrupted seminar, and then Lacan had this policy for whatever reason that if something is interrupted, it's interrupted. I'm not going back to it. So when he got his friend Louis Althusser, and most people know, uh, gave him a room to teach at l'École Normale Supérieure, and that's when Lacan rebooted the seminar, as you said. And what's interesting about that, and I think what makes this the text that everybody, you totally rightly say, that everybody looks to as the fundamental one, is that it was the first one given to a large audience. So all of a sudden there was over 100, 200 people in the audience, not just this little group of 30 psychoanalysts and a few philosophers. So that I think the audience question is the real answer to why or the audience factor is the real answer to the question that you pose. Like, why is this one so important? Because he is the first time he felt like, wow, I got to really make this talk more widely about psychoanalysis. So I think that's, to me, and then when you say something like four fundamental concepts, it sounds like you're doing something grounding, right? That is something you hadn't done before. Like if you say the ego in Freud's theory, well, I don't know, that doesn't seem so grounding. If you say the relation of the object, that doesn't seem, or formations of the unconscious, these are names of the earlier seminars, that doesn't seem so foundational, like four fundamental concepts.
Yeah.
Cool. I got a quick question about this biographical side. So I understand like he has like these breakout moments, and and in my mind I have no separation or timeline for those. But the mirror stage essay, it got some flash of attention for a hot sec. then he kind of disappeared for a while, came back at some point, I don't know how or when, in the consciousness of, say, the French intelligentsia. And then at some point, this happens, this Seminar 11
Mhm.
series. And then and then when he drops the Ecrit, that's like this bestseller, which was kind of not expected.
Right.
When in relation to Seminar 11 is this popularity that comes with the Ecrit?
Yeah. So, David, that's really interesting. So, the Mirror Stage seminar was first given at a psychoanalytic conference, but that text has been lost. So that was given in the mid 30s, so like 35, 36. And famously, Ernest Jones, who was Freud's biographer and not translator, Freud's biographer, English guy, interrupted Lacan and said, "Okay, we've heard enough from you. You've gone over your time." And Lacan was pissed and really kind of retreated from public interaction. And then the Mirror Stage that got published was in 1949, so much later and much modified. And then that one, you're right, that made a big splash, and so people identified Lacan with the Mirror Stage. And then in the mid 50s, he gave this talk called the Rome Discourse. Obviously, it took place in Rome, called the Rome Discourse, and it's basically the Ecrit that became field and function of the signifier and blah blah blah. So then he became known as this Lacan of the symbolic, right? The structuralist Lacan. And then, so Seminar 11 is 1963 to 1964, but it was never, no one had it. Like, it's not, I mean, there were pirate edition, like pirate notes from students, but it was not published until the late 70s. So, or yeah, late 70s. So even in French. So it was the first seminar published by and edited by Jacques-Alain Miller. Lacan had no sense that he was going to publish his seminars, and it's basically the pressure of his son-in-law and literary executor Jacques-Alain Miller that led to that publication. So it's really the event you mentioned, the publication of the Ecrit, was really this next. So there's the Rome Discourse, and then there's the publication of the Ecrit. And in 1966, same year as Foucault's Order of Things. Ironic, neither of them thought that they would become bestsellers. They both thought these are going to be have an isolated audience, but they had a huge reception to each, and so that's when he basically blew up, and people started to go to his seminar then. So his seminar became a place to be basically after the publication of the Ecrit, although there were like Jean Hippolyte, the translator of Hegel into French, Paul Ricoeur, the famous philosopher, like they were there. Ricoeur, there's a little interesting story. So he went to Lacan's seminar for 2 years, and then Lacan called him up and said, "What do you think about what I said today?" Ricoeur goes, "You know what? Frankly, I haven't understood a word really since I've been coming." And Lacan hung up the phone and never talked to him again. And then Ricoeur wrote a book called Freud and Philosophy, in which Lacan thought he basically has plagiarized a lot of my take, and he was really, really pissed. I don't think he
Oh
did
my God.
plagiarize, but so it's a really kind of funny little story. But basically, Lacan's seminar became a place to be after the event you talk about. But it's not because of Seminar 11. Seminar 11 didn't make a splash at all until
Okay.
Miller put it out in the form that that we know it now.
And that was
Yeah.
when does Miller put it out?
It's like 77, something like that. It's very late. And I'm trying to think that ethics seminar may have come out in in Lacan's lifetime, but I think not. I think that may be the only seminar that came out in Lacan's. He dies in 81. So he did not want, I mean, I guess posthumously he gave Miller, I mean, I know he gave Miller ability to do it, but he did not, like publishing the seminars was not his plan. That's Miller's doing, really. Which
Okay,
thank God
cool.
for that, really. Thank God for that, because the seminar, I mean, the écrit, there, people that know me, I have no respect for the écrit whatsoever. I think they should, if they, when Goebbels was throwing psychoanalytic books on the fire, that he could have, that wasn't written yet, but if he'd have thrown that, I would have been, you know what, that makes a lot of sense. So,
Like there's a bright side to the whole, no.
I
Um,
know book burning. It's just, we just don't book burn the right books. That's the problem.
it's the
I mean,
wrong books.
yeah,
Now
yeah.
I'm about to turn this over to Mikey for a couple questions because, like I said, he's got some prepared. But I want to just let everybody know that I'm kind of treating this like syllabus day because we're not going to really have a syllabus day. So we're just going to get right into the heart of the text, or the first section of this text on the first day in July. And today's kind of the day where we're going to talk about various aspects of the theory, but also how to approach this. There's all kinds of questions, such as a really good one in the chat was how much expertise or like background like will be assumed. I'm not exactly sure. I can't find it right now. Oh yeah,
I can answer that question.
how much theory should I be expected to know if I'm looking to take this course? Will it be relatively entry level? That's Lewis.
Yeah, totally. I mean, because I think of myself as entry level, so everything I write and teach is entry level. So yeah, I make no assumptions about my own knowledge about things, because I think when I'm teaching it, I have to work it up from the very beginning for myself. So not just for the other person, just for myself. So absolutely zero. I do want to say one thing, David, and it's tied to something you said to me. We were talking about the four fundamental concepts themselves, and I was kind of struggling for the fourth one, and you're like, oh, it's drive, transference, repetition. Then I'm like, what is the and I couldn't think of it. And it's odd because it's repetition and drive are in a way the same thing. That's the one I couldn't think. I don't know what I couldn't think of, but that it's odd that he doesn't. That one of the concepts is not objet right? Like, and to talk about, because since we're talking about the structure of the course, like there's a whole section about the gaze, and the gaze is not one of the four fundamental concepts. The gaze is only a form of the objet, which itself is not one of the four fundamental concepts. So it's very strange that the gaze gets a quarter of the book, right? Like so the structure of the book is not evenly divided between the different concepts. In fact, I would say transference doesn't have that much of a role at all. I would say subjectivity is one of the main concepts of the book, but that's not one of Lacan's four fundamental concepts. So there's a kind of a strange relationship, I think, between the structure of the text and this title, which is the title in French, is four fundamental concepts of psychoanalysis. So it's not there is a very, very egregious mistranslation actually in the gaze section, which I'll talk about when we get to that. But that's not a mistranslation. I mean, that's the title is the same as in English and French. So it's odd that and Lacan does. I should say this: Lacan does give the titles to the seminars. Everything else is from Molaire. So every individual chapter title. So those are different sessions that Lacan gives. That's what he called them, séance in French, session. And every subsection, all those titles are from Molaire. But the book itself, the text itself, is from that title's from Lacan. So you have to wonder, like, why four fundamental concepts, and why not like something? Why not objet or something like that, right? Like it seems like it's given the structure of it, it seems slightly misleading.
Yeah.
Todd, before we move on, can I just say that I want to address. I know I've heard you say it many times, and I fully agree. Doing the work of translating the text is underappreciated. It's incredibly difficult. But with all respect, is this the best translation we could have of this, or is there a lot of issues with it?
Oh, it's terrible. It's
Okay.
basically terrible, and I feel better saying about that because I believe Alan Sheridan is dead. So I feel like it's a little because of for exactly the reason you say. Like I think, and I really feel I've done some work of translation, and it's horrible. It's thankless. It's hard, and it's the worst. And no one should have to do it. It should be like Dave, you feel about working in Amazon. That's how I feel about translation. Like no one should be doing it. Like if we're going to live in a post-work society, that should be the like I would rather go around picking up the garbage for no pay than working on a translation, right? Like at least people look at me and they're like, "Oh, nice guy, he's taking our garbage away." I feel like the translation, all they do is bitch about you. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I think it's terrible, but your point is correct. The translation is terrible. It's one of the very few times that I feel like knowing the French is the substantive advantage over reading the English. So that
Here's
is an issue.
Bruce Fink has, he's kind of taken on this duty of translating all the untranslated seminars. I mean, like, you think we should get Bruce to do a new translation of it?
Yeah, I think he might. I mean, that's what he did with the Acree because he was so upset by Sheridan's translation of the Acree that he redid it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I
Fingers
think
crossed
that's
they'll do it for us.
yeah, I think it's not impossible to think. The other thing is there's a lot of good translators now of Lacan, right? Like Russell Gray. They're all older though. So Bruce is old. I mean, I think he's semi-retired as a translator, right? And I think like Russell Grigg, I think said that the last one he was doing, I think what did he do? He did a recent one. I think he did 16. I think he did from another to the other. So yeah, so I think that's but there's this guy A.R. Price or whatever. I don't know who that is. Might even be a woman. I don't know, but that translation's good. I think of Upir or worse seminar 19. So I don't know, but I think I think there's a lot of hope because it seems like there's some good translators.
Well, I was going to ask. I mean, and I assume you do this anyway, but I just want, like, as we go each week through each main section of the book, can you point out, like, here's where you really have to correct the translation?
That's exactly what I'm going to do. So the last time I taught it to my students, I read it in French, and I'm going to reread in French, and then point out these points where we need to look at the difference in translation. Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
So I think that's helpful. I mean, it's helpful to me. So I think it'll be helpful to people who don't. Obviously, most people aren't going to be reading French who are reading in English. So
that's
okay.
Really cool because we also have Terrence Blake here in the chat right now of the Agent Swarm blog. He's a author, translator, and he does exegeses on a ton of French texts. Back in the day, he was a student of Deleuze, and he's been in the theory scene here for a long time. He's been a student at Theory Underground for a while. We interviewed him like 4 months ago. But anyway, he's in the chat right now, and he's our French tutor here. And so I'm pretty sure he'll be reading. He's going to be in the course. And so I'm pretty sure he'll be reading it in French with you. And so there'll be like this whole ability for you two to have a real conversation about translation as we go, which I love it. I'm not really properly multilingual in any real sense. And so that'll be cool.
I mean, I basically think I think that's a good. I mean, I think the translation needs to be correct, but I really get a little. I mean, I think it's. I'm against this. Like, oh, you have to know it in the original, or you don't really know it. Like, I think that's just not the case. I've never read a philosopher for whom. I mean, I think the main one that gets this claim is the one you guys like, Heidegger. Like, I think it's like, if you haven't read Heidegger in the German, you haven't really well, I've read Heidegger in the German, and I read Heidegger in English. It's fine. It doesn't, I'm not like, oh, the scales fell from my eyes when I read it in German. I did not feel that way.
That paper you sent me by, what's the name of the author?
Sheehan.
Oh yeah, Sheehan. Right. That's right.
Yeah.
He's critiquing Frey. Fischer or Fay, Fischer, and Volin, right? He
Yeah.
leads off with saying, "Yeah, it doesn't do you any favors to already know the German and like to be reading it in
I know.
German."
In fact, he says the people that know German first are the ones that understand Heidegger least. That's what
Yeah,
he says. It's a great article. Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
what I like about that, it's an article, you can find it on academia if you don't even have to belong to anything. So Thomas Sheehan wrote a book called Making Sense of Heidegger. It's one of the most famous books about Heidegger in the last 20 years.
yeah.
And he got in a little polemic with this guy, Emmanuel Fay, who wrote Martin Heidegger, The
Why?
Introduction of Nazism into Philosophy. So,
Right.
and then Fay wrote another book, which hasn't been translated, called, in fact, I have it right here. It's called Arendt and Heidegger, Destruction in Thought. So it basically, it extends the like, so Fay's point in the original book is Heidegger needs to be classified among Nazi thinkers, not among philosophers. And then in this book, he's like, and you know what? I think Arendt too. She should probably be put among the Nazi thinkers
Oh
and
my
not the
God,
philosophers.
dude.
I know. And then if you look on Amazon for this book, I was just glancing at what people said. One of the reviews says, in his next book, Fay will accuse the Alps of being complicit with Nazism. I thought that had to be one of the funniest things I'd ever read. But yeah, he's a kind of a, and Alain Badiou said about him. He said, what did he call him? He called these. I think he called him a petit hermeneute, like a little hermeneute, like somebody that like trying to find these little interpretations to take down the great philosopher. But yeah, I find Fay kind of enjoyable to read just because, I mean, Heidegger's life is scandalous. I mean,
Oh
and the
yeah,
Black Notebooks are scandalous for sure. But he's still a great thinker. I mean, you know, it's not, he didn't put his books among the Nazis. This is ridiculous. So, and you know, if we're gonna take people's political transgressions and say we dismiss their philosophy, then I don't know, Plato has to go. I mean,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
who's left? I don't know
yeah.
who's left, right? So that's, I don't know. Anyway, so that's
I
that, neither here nor there. Yeah.
I know we're passing this back to you, Mikey, but I'll just say for those who took the Being in Time class with me at Theory Underground, the reading that I was working on, my interpretation I worked on throughout that course, and that I became pretty certain of, is one that I'm currently questioning because Todd was like, "Well, if you want to keep that interpretation, then you better not read this paper," and I was like, no, I like changing my mind when I have a good paper, motivating me. But
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I'll get back to you in 6 months on that one. We'll see. We'll
Okay,
see.
good. Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. I'm curious. Yeah.
All right.
See, look, I mean, like for me, look, I always treated Heidegger, I always read him as basically a good old fashioned existentialist. Like that's, in my reading of him, it did come out of like the pragmatic reading of Hubert Dreyfus and that whole Ian Thompson, Mark Rathall, all them guys, right? Um, After hearing how Dave interpreted it and Dave getting into these other guys who interpret Heidegger, I kind of I'm sold on the idea that there is this fascism baked in to being in time, but it's retroactively. It's like when you get to those last sections on history and all that, it retroactively quilts everything that came before, and that's why everybody who, when I was studying Heidegger, there was a bunch of us who were into it, and we always focused on Division One and then the first 3 to 4 chapters of Division Two. We left out the last two, and at the time we couldn't even tell you why we did. We read through them and we're like, this ain't it. And we weren't even thinking fascism or blah 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 blah. But when you see where he goes with the argument, yeah, I think that's what is going on there. But
Well, Mikey, don't you think it's interesting that have you read Slavoj's book On Belief? I think I mentioned this to David.
yeah,
That I mean, he does say, how Being in Time is famously unfinished, right? And Slavoj says, no, it's not unfinished. It's too long. Like it's
right.
unstopped, right? You
Yeah.
didn't stop soon enough. And I think to me that's the best thing anybody's ever said about it. To tie back to Lacan, though, it's interesting how Lacan has a real, I think he doesn't have this about any other thinker, but I think he has a real anxiety of influence about Heidegger. I think he doesn't want to seem Heideggerian. And there are moments
Yep.
in the seminars when he'll say, like, people want to say, I had a student come up to me and say, this is just Martin Heidegger. It's like, I just want to say, absolutely not. Right. So I think that there's a sense that this anxiety of influence about Heidegger for Lacan, and he's interestingly, so Heidegger came to France early 50s to give a talk. I think it's actually the talk on Das Ding, which is really fascinating. And a couple times, and there was a little conference on him there, led by this guy Jean Beaufray, who was himself a kind of semi-Nazi, but French, and all the other guys like Sartre, Merleau-Ponty, Camus, they boycotted. They're like, Heidegger's a Nazi, we're not going. Lacan did. Not only did Lacan not boycott, he had Heidegger come stay at his house, his country house. So I think there is a real connection between them. Although not, it's totally one. This is true of all. It's another thing interesting about Lacan. It's true of him. It's a total one-way connection, right? Like Heidegger influences Lacan, absolutely zero influence. Same thing with Sartre. Sartre, incredible influence on Lacan, zero influence back. Merleau-Ponty, influence on Lacan, zero influence back. So it is kind of fascinating that Lacan's in this milieu, and he's sucking everything up. A lot of people call him a bricoleur, right? Because he's like putting together all these different things. But it's not influencing. The only person influences Althusser. So it basically, Lacan is the matrix for Althusser's ideology. Lacan misunderstood is the matrix for Althusser's ideology and ideological state apparatus's essay. So that's the only one, though. There's no other influence, which is, I think, pretty fascinating.
Well, wait. You're saying that Lacan impacted Althusser so much that Althusser that when Althusser writes that famous essay, he's thinking basically Lacanian?
Absolutely. 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 Yeah. Absolutely. Cool. In fact, when he says, like, ideology is the imaginary relationships to our real conditions, like, he's just thinking imaginary there is a Lacanian idea, right? Okay. So he's thinking absolutely in Lacanian terms. So yeah, so it's a and what's interesting is all of the reception in the 1970s of this move of Lacan into film theory comes via Althusser and Althusser's theory of ideology. And so that really, this idea of like, we're deceived by mirror relationships and we miss the underlying symbolic structure. That's Althusser, right? And that's
Althusser, like so many of the French theorists that influence all of us, thinks Lacan is basically Lacan of the symbolic, seminars 1 through 6, and he doesn't get the real. That's Slavoj's big critique in
right.
Object, right?
Right. I mean, that like, you could argue that Slavoj's birth is in a sense like exposing that error in the reception of Lacan, right? Exactly.
I'll just say too, like, as far as, just for a second, look, this notion of this negative subject, right? That is not its positive features, right? That Lacan is going to theorize better than anybody, right? Heidegger in Division 2, he talks about these structural nullities, these nothingnesses at the core of Dasein. Sartre takes that and turns the fourth self or consciousness into nothingness, right? Like, he's
annihilating nothingness. That's what he says. Annihilating nothingness.
He's getting this from these two existentialists, both of whom deeply influenced him, like you said, but he doesn't give them credit for doing so. Right. And so,
absolutely true, right? Like he is an and I think, look, when you said Seminar 11 is this entrance point, isn't it because, in a way, this existentialist Lacan comes to the fore in Seminar 11 in a way that was, he's much more this, as you were saying about Althusser's reading, he's much more the structuralist in Seminars 1 through 6. And then he has this weird Bataille moment in Seminar 7. And then I think working up to seminar 11, it's much more this existentialist kind of rewriting of Heidegger and Sartre. And obviously, I mean,
anxiety, right? Seminar 10.
absolutely, right? Like, I mean, it's giving it his own take, right? Because for Heidegger, anxiety means being held out into the nothing. And for Lacan, anxiety means being like the over proximity of this object. Although Hillary, my spouse, and I have been she's writing a book on fear, and we've been having a little argument. She's like, no, Lacan's conception of anxiety is actually really Heidegger's, because the proximity of the object is the proximity of an object of nothing. And so you could really say you're being held out. And so I can see that. I don't think that's dumb. I mean, I think that there's an argument for that. But I think if you take the words, it seems like he's countering Heidegger. But yeah.
Oh, no, go ahead, finish.
I was just going to say, I think that I was going to come around to say, I think your basic point is right, that all these Heideggerian concerns and Sartrean concerns are coming to a head. So anxiety seminar is seminar 10, and then seminar 11 is the one that we're going to talk about. And it's interesting that the term, so French has two words for anxiety, angoisse and anxiété, and the term that Sartre uses in Being and Nothingness is angoisse, often translated as anguish. I think Hazel Barnes translates anguish. I don't know what the new translator translates it as. But that's the term Lacan uses. Like he could very easily use anxiété, which is just the English, but he uses the Sartrean term, which I think supports your point that he's really, like, this is the point where he's really responding to that existentialist movement.
Well, I was super, one of the first serious pieces of writing I ever did was trying to think this through. It's on my blog if anybody wants to look at it. It's thinking through Kierkegaard, Heidegger, and Lacan on anxiety, right? And what Kierkegaard and Heidegger have in common, and they both talk like this, is that fear has a determinate object, whereas anxiety, you don't have a specific object that makes you anxious. And Lacan goes out of his way to say, no, anxiety has an object. So he is distancing himself from Kierkegaard and Heidegger. But like you say, the point is OJA when it's in your vicinity.
But it's not an object.
It's not, but it's
a fake object. It's not a real object.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The point is specific objects embody it.
Right. I mean, Dave, the issue is, and this is the quarrel I had with Hillary, the issue is, one of his examples is the mother is the jaws of the crocodile, right? Like that's when you feel anxiety, when you're in the jaws of the crocodile. So Heidegger would never say that.
That's
Heidegger would never, and Kierkegaard would never say that. They would say, I mean, look, in What is Metaphysics lecture, Heidegger is very clear. It's like your anxiety, you're held out into the nothing, right? Like that's not the jaws of the crocodile bearing down on you. So I do think you're right, Dave. It is an object of nothing.
Yeah.
But it's still, there's still things that embody it, and then
it has a specificity and determinacy to it, that groundlessness of the world, or the ultimate meaninglessness beneath meaning. That's not what Lacan's getting at. And the point is, like, there's these examples in seminar 10 where, like, what is it? The homosexual girl, she's out with her girlfriend, lover, as far as I understand. This is like her coming out, and then she sees her father's gaze, and it's not gaze in the technical, like just
his look,
his look staring at her, and it causes her
to kill herself.
Yeah, she has an anxiety attack, and so that's the thing, is this OJA is positioned in his actual look for her, and it's too much for him or for her to bear, and she tries to kill herself.
Right. I mean, it's just, to me, I mean, I will talk about this some in the seminar, the way in which the anxiety seminar kind of leads up to seminar 11. And maybe it's just confusing to me why he doesn't make objet one of the four fundamental concepts of psychoanalysis. It just doesn't make really any sense at all.
Because it's at work in all, well, I mean, I know how I can talk about how it's at work with repetition and drive. I can talk about how it's at work with transference. I mean, this is why I want to do, like, what's the specific relation between objet and unconscious? I mean, objet is unconscious, but it's not the unconscious, right?
Right. It's not the unconscious, it's the manifestation of the unconscious, right? Like, or it's what can only manifest itself unconsciously, right? Like, you can't, isn't that the point? Like, you can't consciously, like, I'm going to look for the gaze. So gaze is this great example of objet on seminar 11. I'm going to look for the gaze in this film. Well, that's not the point. Like, the gaze has to, then that's why he goes through this whole thing of automaton and 2K, right? Like, there's this automatic function of the symbolic, and then there's this what Aristotle calls 2K, this like interruption, right? This connection, this break, and that's when you connect with the objet, right? Like, it's not, you can't, if you plan it out, you miss it. You can't say, like, you know what, I'm going to go search for a partner tonight in the bars that's going to have my objet, and I'm going to find it in, or even in a specific person, like, I'm going to find it in Jeffy. I'm going to look and I'm going to find the objet on Jeffy. No, then you're going to absolutely miss it, right? Because it can't be. So I think that's the relation to unconscious, right? Like, it has to get you unconsciously.
And see, and this is the other thing, like the other Lacanian object, phallus, right? The other, it works the same way, which is, you can't, I'm going to choose which man has the phallus. You can do that. It's right. Again, it's this unconscious working that
right.
establishes it.
Right. And with phallus, it's even like, the more someone seems to deny it, the more they seem to have it, right? Like, I mean, it's interesting about Trump in this light, right? Like, we're constant, like, there's this constant, like, by mainstream media, we're going to show Trump's castration over and over and over again, but what they end up doing is phallicizing him over and over again.
Because so if he didn't have the phallus, they wouldn't have to keep doing this.
Exactly.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So it's not, I mean, I hate conspiracy theory, basically. But my one conspiracy theory I indulge in is, I think they know very well what they're doing. And they know that their popularity rests upon a Trump presidency, because Biden has been a total disaster for them. And so I think this is actually part of the Trump.
Well, this gets at your point about how you call it rightist enjoyment, right? But the point is, I would just call it, I don't know, particularistic, in the sense of, it doesn't matter in America right now if it's the right or the left. Both of them are operating according to scapegoat logic, where you always have to find the one person to blame or the one group to blame. And if they weren't there, everything would be harmonious and we could move towards a better world. And basically the point, like, no one is tapped into what you call leftist enjoyment. Nobody's operating, at least in either party, on any sort of like universalist form of politics. And what you have is two parties operating on particularistic identity politics.
I know. I actually think that that's a problem with that book, right? Like, the title of it should have been like Universalist versus Particularist or something, because I think even setting it up in that opposition right left already kind of gets into this like dualistic like competing particular problem that you're onto there. I think that's yeah. So
it just can be misleading, because if people don't know the specific terms, right, you use left and right in more technical terms, the average person using them colloquially would just say, oh, so the Democrats have the right type of enjoyment and the Republicans have, and no, it's basically two types of rightist enjoyment.
I know. The disaster of this was somebody, I don't know, it was a YouTube, I don't know what it was. I do so many of these things, and someone says to me, well, you should be an advisor for the Democratic Party with your consent. And I said, what the hell are you talking about? That is the last thing they need. And last thing I would want to do, right? Like, that's, I mean, it's
but Todd, I thought about this a lot since you said that the first time to me. And here's my thing. Yes, you should not be out here giving people, I don't think you want to tell people what to do, but I think
Yeah.
you could definitely tell them, hey, you know that thing you keep doing, that
Don't do that anymore.
that's why you're losing. Yeah, you know, that kind of thing for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, yeah. I mean, right, right. Okay.
I
So
think
I'll
you'd
just
be
tell them
good at
what
that.
I'll tell them what not to do. Bring your ideas. I'll reject all of them.
But
I'll
So
they'll
just
still kill
go,
you because they're
no.
no, but they'll still kill you, Todd, because once you tell them what not to do, they're so libidinally invested in it at this point that if you tell them not to do that thing, like they'll just kill you.
Oh, they'd go
yeah,
like,
well, I mean, I think it's what they want. I mean, when people say that to me, what they want is a big other to tell them what to do, right? And the whole point is, look, and I think Hegel is probably the best on this, right? I mean, I think Lacan, I don't know, politically, I don't think we should even talk about Lacan, but um, I think like what Hegel's point is that what to do politically is determined by the struggle itself, not by somebody coming on high to tell you what to do, right? Like I think isn't that what's great about the French Revolution compared to the American, right? Like they were just trying to figure it out, and the Americans had this certain like matrix that they took from Montesquieu, and like we're going to just impose that, and so I feel like working it out in a struggle is how you do it. Like I don't think there can't be some voice of authority. There's no like Kyrgyz who tells you like this is the Constitution, and then you have like I just don't think that's how it works.
Mount Sinai, the voice tells you what to.
Yeah, yeah. I hate that kind of crap. Yeah, but I think I mean maybe in this course we should talk. It's interesting. Lacan's interesting because as evident today, a lot of his followers are on the emancipatory side of things, and he was a conservative. So I mean he's not Heideggerian conservative, but he's a real conservative. So it's interesting the way that has that his thought has kind of come around, and I think Seminar 11 is a crucial turning point for that. Like people found something in that they were able to marshal for. I mean, especially Mike, you mentioned Slavoj. I mean, he's the one, right? Like he's really in Sublime Object. It's basically about Seminar 11, and it's basically about how can this subjectivity that Lacan describes become an emancipatory form, right?
Yeah. Like here's the thing. I think this is important though for setting the context of in the seminar is we always say I hear it all the time. Lacan was a conservative, and he was, but to the average young American hearing that, they hear either oh, so he's MAGA or there's all this stuff, and so I think it would be helpful just like he's somebody who is very leery, pragmatically speaking, about just thinking we can utterly undermine the status quo and establish something new. Would you say he's conservative in that sense?
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. He's not a MAGA. He's the opposite of a MAGA. He would be totally against Trump, and he was against Vichy actually. So in that sense, he was heroic, right? He did not he did what he could to rescue Jews in the during the Vichy rule in France, and he protected Jews that he knew, to say to say the least. So that there's something in that, and so he'd be the opposite of a MAGA. He was not seduced by Hitler. He wasn't seduced by Mussolini. He and Pétain obviously he resisted. Uh, but I think exactly what you're saying is correct, Mikey. That it's he's very wary of progressive what he thinks of as attempts at progressive change because he thinks they always end up producing a new form of rule that is often more oppressive than the thing they replace. So, for instance, he went. This was in 1969, I think. He went to the University of Vincennes, which was the most. It's University of Paris 8, Paris 8, and it was a radical university set up to be more student centered, et cetera. And they invited Lacan to come speak to them, and then and the students just basically were just he tries to give this talk which is inscrutable, and they're sick of it. They're like, what are you doing? And then one student comes up and takes off all his clothes in front of Lacan, and Lacan's like, that doesn't impress me so much. And then very famously at the end Lacan goes, look, okay, I'm leaving, but here's what I have to say to you. You want a new master, you'll have one. Right? Like, so that's, I think, exactly what you're getting at, is that he thinks he's not a progressive because he thinks these supposed progressive movements always end up with just a new form of mastery. And that's the problem with them. So I
And
think,
and he's really referring to the cult of personality you see in actually existing
yeah,
socialist states, right?
right. Like, he didn't know Hugo Chavez, but Chavez would be an example. Mao is certainly an example. Stalin is definitely an example, right? So he, uh, Pol Pot, right? Like, he has a real, Pol Pot wasn't around yet, but he has a real sense of that.
And isn't his point with saying there's a couple things. One, his point is, I think, there's a return of the repressed when you repress any sense of authority on a practical level, anything like that, when you're completely anti-hierarchy, anti-authority, it ends up coming back in a stronger form, right? Because what you end up doing is you put all your faith in a master figure who's going to destroy authority
Yeah,
and destroy hierarchy, but this is this weird unconscious return of the repressed, right? Something like that.
yeah, yeah. I think he's really afraid of, or wary of, the development of, excuse me, this isn't my idea, but my podcast partner Ryan Engley calls it this rhizomatic fascism. So I think he's very anti-Deleuze and Guattarian in the sense that he thinks, okay, yeah, fine, level out authority, but just like you're saying, like, there has to be an authority that levels out the authority, and then that figure ends up being even more oppressive than the hierarchy in the first place.
Because
So
he's doing it in the name of freedom, liberation, freedom. Like,
right,
so
right. And in the name of the people, right? Like,
yeah.
it's a very, like, Lacan is a very anti-populist, left or right populist thinker, because he thinks, you think you're tearing down the hierarchy and you're just reestablishing it in a new disguised form. So that's he, and I'm not sure that he's wrong about that. I don't think that that's necessarily wrong. And I think, I mean, his point is there has to be some kind of verticality, and that if you try to eliminate that with this pure horizontality, you're going to end up with an even more oppressive kind of verticality in hierarchical rule.
Well, let me ask, is
Todd,
this a point?
no, man. Oh, I'm triggered. It's okay. We
Okay, I
won't get
triggered you.
into it
Good,
right now.
good.
Yeah, no, it is good. Um, Someday I'd like to bookmark maybe coming back to
Yeah,
populism, because I just don't like this. Like, everybody in the world of theory engages with the idea of populism coming from what's the name of those two guys? Uh,
Laclau
uh,
and move.
Thank you. Yes,
Yeah,
but never like the actual American tradition that arose in the 1870s and
yeah,
1880s, which at its basis was basically working people saying, "Hey, we should be able to read too." Like,
yeah.
that is its roots, and then what it becomes later is something else. But I just want to dig.
Is it something else?
I just want to.
Is it
Well,
something else?
more than people wanting to be able to also read, and being able
No, no, no,
to.
no, no, no. I'm just saying where it goes. Where it goes.
I
Like,
mean,
I agree with you.
what it basically
Initially,
became
I agree with you.
what it basically became was just like, oh, we want free silver, right? Like, it
Well,
it
it
degenerated.
becomes much worse than that. It becomes like, think of the trajectory of a guy like Tom Watson, right? Like great populist figure of the 1880s and 90s, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, like, one of the most virulent racists in American history, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the here would be my issue, right? Like, I think populism, fine, it can, and this is actually the point I'm trying to make to Mikey, right? That we're making right now, right? Like, that that the problem is that the leveler, there has to be a leveler who's doing the leveling. I mean, I think Trump is performing that exact function right now. Like, he is a genuine populist. And I understand that there's a lot of, like, Laclau and Moof, and even friends of mine who have inherited their, like, Yanis Stavrakakis is really invested in populism from a Lacanian perspective, and hopefully he won't be listening to this. Um, but no, I'm just kidding. He knows my view.
Yeah.
Uh, but I think that I think you can't get out of the verticality, right? And that to me, look, obviously, I'm completely invested in like mass dissemination of theory to the working class, as
Yeah, yeah,
invested
yeah.
as a person could be.
Yeah.
But my point is, I'm also have no investment in academic hierarchies and thinking like, oh, someone in a university has a right to talk about Heidegger in a way that Dave doesn't. I don't care about that in the slightest. Like, if you end up refuting Tom Sheehan, I'm like, more power to you. I'm totally on your side. So I don't have any investment. But my point is that populist, like, total horizontality,
Yeah, yeah,
it
yeah, yeah,
never
yeah.
works.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
my only
yeah.
point. So
I
and
agree.
I understand the signifier populism is one that some people have a lot of investment in. So that
Yeah.
I understand that.
Oh, I only have a little bit. Maybe I exaggerated. By the way,
Look, part of it
Austin
is
Wukas in the chat. Wukas in the chat from Poland. He said, "I can't believe Todd didn't give us a trigger warning before not straightforwardly denying all hierarchies." That's the thing. At Theory Underground, we're not gonna. We genuinely, of course, aren't gonna really care. But no. I also wanted to. We will come back to this in a moment. I want to let you go here, Mikey. But um, well, no, actually, I'll just say it really quick.
Yeah.
Lewis Higgins was the one asking about the difficulty level. You know, how much background information would be required, and then earlier in the conversation was just like, oh my god, gaze, objet, phallus. I don't know any of these terms. I thought this was supposed to be like introductory, and I just wanted to say. So what I said in the chat addressed it, but I want to say this for the people who'll be listening to this on podcast later. I dropped a bunch of links. Uh, so we've got a basic crash course on Lacan in the way of Mikey teaching me. So we've got Lacan 101 that happened in 2020 through 2021, and then how that gets applied to politics, ideology, and ultimately through Zizek. Intro to Zizek, and so that happens between 2021 and 2022 or 2023, and then so I dropped those playlists there, and then we've also got Mikey's posts on OJA and the phallus, and then us reading those last week. We read those. We did exegetical live streams. Todd drops in on one of those. It was a lot of fun. And then of course there's the rest of the Dangerous Maybe blog, and then of course there's also just Why Theory itself, the podcast. And so we do have a lot of like introductory stuff, but also when we're actually there in the course, it'll be time, so if there's any like gaps remaining, it'll be okay. We'll be able to cover everything. But also just a general note on not knowing something. I think the American education system schools us or programs us sort of to think that everything has to come in a chronological order. And in continental philosophy, it's never going to be that way. You're always in the deep end. And if you don't know the meaning of a word, just treat it like an algebraic like placeholder, and it'll get filled in over time. Like that's my main thing. I wonder what you guys think of that.
That's a great way to talk about it. I think I really like that, and I mean, I'm going to strive in the course to not assume anything, to try to like work through these different concepts as if for the first time. I mean, we're talking here in a way that's sometimes more advanced than that, but so I'll try to. But I do think what your basic point is so correct, because when I just to give you a little thing, so I read Seminar 11 for the first time in a little theory group with a bunch of friends of mine, and each of us gave on each session, each of us gave a talk, right? Not a talk, but like a presentation, right? And we met, I don't know, however, 20 and many times over a year. And mine was so dumb that it's just impossible for me now to even think how I could not have understood. Like, I was on this whole thing like drive is this tied to the imaginary, and like it just is like completely it has no connection to what Lacan is trying to say whatsoever. So I think your point is really right. Like, you have to, and Lacan even says this several times, like, you have to misunderstand before you can understand, right? And I think that's and then the question is, like, I think a lot of people like Noam Chomsky are like, well, Lacan is not worth it because it's just gobbledygook at the end. I just don't think that's true. Like, I think you can see from a lot of really important contemporary thinkers that it can't be just gobbledygook, that there's really a value added to grasping what Lacan has to do. But I think your first steps in it are always going to be missteps. They're always going to be like, it doesn't make sense to you. I like that notion of it's just like an X, almost like a thing that you just like, okay, I'll kind of fill in later what that means. What is gaze? Like, it took me, I don't even think some of our great experts on gaze, I think sometimes they say it a little incorrectly. Like, I'm not even gonna, like, friends of mine that I'm like, yeah, not really. Like, I think you kind of missed what Lacan was saying in the petit example from seminar 11, for instance. So I think it's really hard. And I think even I mean, me, obviously, I've had many times where I've made errors. I think there's times when Slavoj has made errors even. So I think there's not a like a, you don't start with mastery and then work through it. It's the opposite. It's the opposite
Part of it
direction.
is
Like, you're
like this thing we call Lacanian theory is a moving, developing tapestry of concepts. And if you change one concept, it's going to change another. And so somebody who's getting into it, it is a like a living, breathing system of concepts. And to have Todd teach seminar 11 is going to be different than if Bruce Fink or Richard Boothby, like, even though there's lots of overlap, there's going to be consensus. They're also going to diverge in idiosyncratic ways. And those are going to, so part of getting into Lacanian theory, and I had to learn this early on, is it's not even like, oh, there's different interpretations of Descartes. Here are the three main ones. You learn those and then you work, like, it's not that nice and neat when it comes to Lacanian theory. It's finding a way in and then trying to orient yourself the best you can. And then once you have a basic orientation, develop it as you work through it.
Well, I think actually, isn't that what's kind of the one thing that's sort of exciting about Lacan relative to
Yeah.
other thinkers, right? Because you're not like, I had this, as you guys know, because you organized it. I had this debate with Chris Cutrone, and he seemed to be taken aback, or he thought I was lying because I said I didn't think of myself as Lacanian. But I think it's kind of related to what you said, Mikey, right? Like, I think, like, oh, okay, I've taken this little part of Lacan. I think it's a really part that's in his career not that big, and I've sort of taken and worked with that a little bit. But I think it gives you, like, I think it allows you to be like really to find some resources in him without like totally devoting yourself to his thought. Like, I think it's, for instance, I think it's very hard not to do that with someone like Derrida, right? Like, you're sort of a Derridian or you're not, or you're sort of a, people are going to get mad at me for this. You're sort of a Deleuzian or you're not. You're sort of Foucauldian or you're not. And I think with Lacan, I don't think that's true. I think there's a kind of a kind of like, okay, because, and I think it's because he changes so much. Like, and just like you said about Rick Boothby versus Slavoj, like, Rick and Slavoj can barely talk about Lacan to each other because their emphasis is so opposed. And I go from one, I often will spend a weekend with Rick and then I'll talk with Slavoj and I'll be like, wait a minute, okay, I have to realize that they're both in the same Lacanian orbit, like, they're just so opposed to each other. And I mean, I both of them are dear
And then
friends
the
of
thing,
mine,
if you
but
broaden it out, right? Let's broaden that out. Okay, so there's Rick and Slavoj, but then there's you, there's Dwayne Roussel, there's Matthew Flissfader, there's Bruce Fink,
Mari, she's
Mari,
like far the farthest away, right?
Mari, Joan Kopchak, and you get it like, and you go, do all these people agree on it? Adrian Johnston, like, no,
Right.
you
They don't
guys would,
agree. They may not agree on anything at all. Right. Like, that's the key thing, right? Like, if you found the two farthest poles, who would it be? Like, Mari and Adrian, maybe, right? Like, they might not agree on a single thing.
yeah.
So I think that, to me, that's like, and I don't think it means that Lacan's thought is just so amorphous it means nothing. No, I think it's like it's developing, for one thing. That's a really important thing. It's developing all the time in a way that other thinkers thought is not developing. And there's openings to like do with it what you will, because Lacan doesn't, right? Like he's very elliptical and cryptic, and he has so many. I mean, Molière is putting it together. It's spoken, but he has so many one sentence paragraphs, right? Like okay, what is that? What is that? That's not a developed idea,
Yeah.
but it gives you a chance to develop it and say, oh, I want to take it in this way. So then, is that still Lacanian?
I
Maybe, but good.
I I want to so on this the fact that there is there are really big different directions that you can take Lacan because of the different phases of his work. Also, obviously, of course, just like the the difficulty of interpreting him in the first place, and so the interpretive communities are going to have this ability to kind of fracture. But I mean, you could say the same thing about you could say that about Derrida, but there's something special with Lacan, and I just dropped this reference in the live chat for anyone who wants to look at it. But I recommend Peter D. Matthews' book Lacan the Charlatan, where basically he takes the claim that Lacan is a charlatan to task. And so I listened to that while working at Amazon last year, and what Matthews shows is that Lacan really did strive to undermine this image of himself as the guy who's got the answers. In fact, like in fact, his entire theory, in some sense, is dealing with that problem and trying to show the analysts that he's training, hey, you guys don't have the answers. Stop it. You guys are fucking people up. And I think that kind of relates to something that had come up in the chat earlier about anti-psychiatry, because someone was asking about the relation between Lacan and Guattari. And so someone else was saying, oh yeah, actually, well, a lot of what they were doing was a critique of psychoanalysis with anti-psychiatry. And I just wanted to say, like, yeah, maybe, but also Lacan is also very critical of the entire establishment, not only of his time, but his critique of ego psychology is just as relevant today, right? And so I don't know if
For
you might want
sure,
to
for
touch
sure.
on, maybe you could touch on a little
Yeah,
bit of
yeah, for
that.
sure.
Yeah.
So if you look at the first two seminars and basically the first three quarters of BA Cree, it is a sustained critique of ego psychology, right? Like and he even says, this is in seminar 7, I think. I don't know why we think we should place ourselves as the guarantors of bourgeois lifestyle, right? So he is really opposed to that. And then I think that everything you're saying is right. Like I think, and the Guattari thing is interesting because Guattari was a Lacan student, and then they did not think, when they wrote Anti-Oedipus, the first volume, they did not think that they were writing it against Lacan. They thought they were writing it, Guattari at least, in the spirit of Lacan. So Lacan himself is an I think, and this is talk about disputed points. This is a real disputed point. I think Lacan is an anti-Oedipus thinker himself, right? Or he comes to be one. This got me in a little hot water with Lee Edelman when I said, "Oh, it has to be. He has to be," and Lee did not like that so much. But it wasn't. He's a good friend of mine, so he wasn't mean, but he was just like, "No, you're wrong." So, but I think that
But he comes to say that Oedipus was Freud's dream, right?
yes, he does say that. Yeah,
Which
yeah,
is
he
to
does
say,
say that.
to break, he's saying that the Oedipus complex is basically an idiosyncratic aspects of Freud's own desire.
That is Lacan's position. Yes, exactly, exactly. Yeah. So I think that so that I think lends credence to this idea that he's not that far from Deleuze and Guattari, at least in the critique of Oedipus. I think that their conception of desire can never be reconciled with Lacan's, and
I agree.
that's
Totally.
just the way it is. But I think that I feel like that the critique of ego psychology in so much of Lacan is a critique of our contemporary therapeutic world, right? And the way that therapy is done today, and it's also its ineffectiveness. At least my own experience of its ineffectiveness. Maybe other people have had a more effective experience of it, but I feel like that is like what he's getting at is this attempt to that healing is part of the problem, and in a way, Michael, this touches back to what we're saying about conservatism and progressivism, right? Like there's something profoundly conservative about the idea of healing. And if he's resisting the idea of healing, that does sort of distance him from this conservatism, even in the political sense.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and then, I mean, look, I mean, part of it, like Lacan would be anti DSM-5, right? Because part of it, look, Lacan gives us these tools: objas, superego, big other, master sign. He gives us these concepts to use: phallus, uh, symptom, all these things. But the point is, he never pretends to have the answer to a specific patient's analysan's issues, right? The point is, he gives you conceptual tools as an analyst to approach the person sitting in front of you who has some pathological issue. But the point is, every analysis has to be a singular attempt to help the other in their singularity, and that ego psychology, and then you go on into psychiatry with the DSM-5. It thinks they can just, oh, it's so capitalistic or efficient oriented. Like, oh, you have X, Y, and Z problems. Well, let's look it up. Oh, X, Y, and Z answers. Oh, and they all involve medication. Here you go. Take your drugs
I
and
know.
voila. And Lacan is so against that because the only way somebody can even come, and again, psychoanalysis, Lacanian psychoanalysis is not about healing in some sense of, oh, I'm going to gain happiness with a capital H, or I'm going to find everlasting peace and harm. No, you're never going to have the shit. What you can do is work through your unconscious and come to understand how you give yourself too much trouble, what's behind your symptom. All you can do is reckon with yourself. But the reckoning, yeah, could we say it's therapeutic in a sense? Yes, but not in the way that people dream up what a therapeutic cure would be.
Right. It doesn't deliver you from your problems. It delivers you over to your problems, right?
Yeah,
Like
it lets you know what
yeah,
your problems are. That's
yeah,
you don't
right,
even know
right.
what's
Which
going on with you.
it doesn't give you rid of it doesn't get rid of them for you. I think it's such a great point. I mean, I think it really like what he envisions for analysis is in a way curing people of the idea of the cure, right? Like that's what he wants to do. Like
Yeah.
you come to me wanting to be cured, sorry, I'm going to show you you're not going to be cured. And I think that's really crucial. I also think, just to speak to this drug thing, I find it very funny. So I teach students all the time that come from psychology. And what happens is, of course, they take classes in psychology, they hope they read Freud, and then they're like, well, there's no Freud, or they just get this dismissal of Freud. And then they come into my film classes, they're like, oh, I think a film class, I get to read Freud. It's a weird thing. And then they all say, all I learned about Freud was that he dangerously flirted with cocaine as a treatment, right? And then I think, well, that's funny because today psychiatrists are prescribing drugs that they have no idea if they work, why they work, and then they just hand them out like they're candy, right? And I think like was Freud's experimentation with cocaine all that much riskier than this? No, it
I
was
think
probably
I think
much
isn't
more.
cocaine safer than half the shit people are
It's
swallowing?
safer. I
Like,
know. I know. I'm like, I have a friend whose life he was having a little problem. Basically, his anxiety, his life was basically destroyed by the medication they gave.
yep.
So I'm like, okay, like, is that like, where's the article on that as the like this misuse of medication? So of course
Mm-hmm.
I'm not against all. I mean, I'm like my I have no people that have been saved by lithium who've been manic depressive. So I'm not against obviously medication, but I just think it's handed out in like a almost like just a haphazard fashion, and they don't know like what are you treating. They're not sure, and they're not sure why it even works if it does work. So
Yeah, but
I just
this
think
is where people always want to say this is D and G. oh, psychoanalysis serves the capitalist agenda. I want to say, no, the fuck it doesn't. Sitting around, even if it takes years to work through your unconscious on some level, that is so inefficient. It so goes against the talking cure, so goes against the logic of capital. This is not going to be over tomorrow. It's not going to be fixed. You're not just, back to work. It takes years to work through this stuff, which in and of itself goes against the logic of how capitalism wants to.
I agree with that. I agree with that. I think it's a basic disruption of capital. I think
yeah, and first off, the whole point is to undermine completion, which the commodity system is always selling you. So it's trying to tell you in an indirect way, no commodities ever going to make you happy. There's no. One of my unreleased books that we're going to put out sometime is called The Final Commodity. There is no final commodity, right? And so it's all that. Dave, hold on. I just want to wrap up two things real quick, and then you said, "Are we going to take a break?"
Yeah, no, we'll. So I have a thing I'm going to roll just for a minute, and then we'll come back and talk for like the close. But go for it. Yeah, say your thing.
Okay, yeah, because Todd, I have a couple more questions for you after the video. All I want to say is, look, going back to the populism thing, the way I understand it is this. Look, there is a distinction, first off, between how Lacan is talking about hysteria and how Zizek does. Because when Lacan is saying, hey, you revolutionaries really desire a master, don't worry, you'll get one, he's also thinking of them in terms of a hysterical structure, right? Lacan thinks that the hysteric is the one who is constantly chipping away at authority. But the point is, they do this because they themselves don't know what they actually desire. And so they're getting enjoyment from undermining the master. But in reality, they really do want a master to tell them what they desire because they can't figure out what they desire. Obsessionals are much more secure in what they think they desire. There's issues there too. But their sense of what they want is much more solid opposed to the hysteric. But the point is, this is where Lacan and Zizek have a bit of a disagreement on some level. Zizek thinks hysteria is the actual proper position from which to critique power and authority. So my thing is, I do think we can square the circle. I think the issue is this. Hysteria does question authority. That is what Socrates did. That is what Hegel did. That is what all the philosophers we love did. That is what meaningful, real political activists and revolutionaries have done. We want that type of meaningful hysteria. We do not just want to accept things as the status quo. That's just it, and we can't question them. The risk of hysteria is that you end up enjoying this very process, and so you unconsciously seek to reproduce it. I talk about pseudo activity. Hysteria has this tendency to drift into, oh, I'm challenging authority, but in reality, I'm doing something that's not actually going to undermine authority, and it's all a big Baudrillardian simulation of challenging power. But hysteria, nevertheless, does have this important dimension to it that Zizek hones in on. So the point is, I think you can square the circle. With Lacan, he's just focusing on the risk of the enjoyment that hysteria can get locked into with questioning authority, whereas Zizek's saying, I would prefer not to. And the prefer not to is, I want to hystericize, I want to challenge, but I don't want to get hooked on this very activity so as to unconsciously reproduce it. The I would prefer not to is, I would prefer not to enjoy the very act of challenge, the very act of hystericization. And so, and the risk for Lacan, though, and this is the important thing with populism, on the one hand, we all want the masses to give a fuck. We all want the masses to be up in arms in a sense, right? But there's always a deep potential threat with that, which is the type of jouissance that can take hold in populism are incredibly fucking destructive forms of jouissance. And so the point is not, oh, populism bad. We don't want to get the masses up and mobilized. Of course, we want to do that on some level, but we have to be aware all the time of the risk that a certain type of jouissance can bring if it infiltrates and takes hold in a populist movement, right? And the point is, because the people in a populist movement, I don't care if they're on the right or on the left, these movements are always, there's all of these problems going on in my society. I don't know what the fuck to do to solve them. I just know that there's problems and something needs to be done because of them. There's a pragmatic yearning and longing for a transferential figure, which is to say somebody who is the subject supposed to know. I don't know how to fix things. I just know that I want things to be fixed. So if I find somebody who has the knowledge of how to fix things, I'm invested in that person, and they can do no wrong because they're my only hope, right? And that's where, when you lock into transference, and transference is one of the four fundamental concepts of ideology, transference can teach us stuff beyond just the relationship between a patient and an analyst. It helps us understand the very ideological dynamic between a political leader and their diehard supporters, right? Transference is this unconscious mechanism that makes you go, no, that's the person who can fix the situation. That's the person who can get us out of it. But the point is, once that link has taken hold, you turn a blind eye to everything this person does, and you act like they're substantial or exceptional. And I would say phallic here. The phallus comes into play here. And again, we're using the jargon terms. But the point is, you give them because you think they have the knowledge, that means they have this exceptional status above the ordinary person, which gets you to basically give them God privileges to talk in a more commonsensical way. It's like you let them, well, God can do whatever he wants because he's God, right? It's okay. And I've talked to Christians, you can point out all this horrible stuff Jehovah did in the Old Testament. Well, I mean, okay, but he's God, right? People do this same thing. Well, he's Stalin, he's the leader, he's Hitler, he's the lead. Like, that's the risk involved in all that. And so it's just our job to be leery and to understand the risks that go into mass mobilization.
Period.
Guys, I got so many things I want to talk about. We're not going to get to any of them because I want to focus on this course. I'm going to write you guys a little essay later. Right now, I'm going to roll this little PSA about Theory Underground and stuff that we're doing. And then we'll be right back to talk about the rest of Mikey's questions, but also something we touched on only in passing. It was actually you who touched on it, Todd. And that was on the conversation you had with Chris Catrone, the converdiction. We'll come right back to something that I wanted to say. Since you brought it up anyway, we'll bring it back to that. We'll come right back, everybody. Hang on.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Welcome to Theory Underground, a place for workers with earbuds who are tired of the bullshit and just want to get down to it. Big ideas, rigorous thinking, and ultimately liberation from necessity.
Research at Theory Underground focuses on what is most important for understanding our current situation. Theory of the subject, capital, time-energy theory, critical media theory, CMT, and the most essential critiques necessary for understanding why the theory, ideology, and common sense of influencers left to right misses the mark.
Theory Underground is coming to a city near you. Besides a commitment to publishing certain underground theorists and popularizing certain fundamental concepts, we have toured the United States and are touring Europe to promote our ideas, courses, and publications. You've been reading Underground Theory.
Amazing book. I'm a publisher and an editor. I run a review of books. Literally, it's my living. This is the best edited collection I've ever read.
Okay, picture this scene. America, early 2021. An Amazon warehouse worker arises from the emerging underground theory internet scene to create spaces for untimely topics and concerns that are too often neglected or kept in isolation today. Joined by a revolving cast of underground theorists, academics, and critics, he establishes what will become Theory Underground, a teaching, research, and publishing platform by and for working-class intellectuals, autodidacts, and academics who want to do more than they're able to do within the confines of academia. That warehouse worker's name is David McKerracher, and his book Time Energy is his first major contribution to the world of theory. It was recently reprinted with a foreword by none other than Slavoj Žižek, who also contributed to Theory Underground's latest book.
My Bible, it's an excellent book.
A collection of essays called Underground Theory.
What you just heard is an excerpt from the Strange Exiles podcast, episode 23, where Bram from Strange Exiles interviewed me and Mikey. For those who don't know, Mikey is the author of the Dangerous Maybe blog. We are publishing one of his books here shortly at Theory Underground. He's also a lecturer at Theory Underground, and he's someone I've been friends and a collaborator with for over 10 years. But most importantly for you all, he's a fantastic lecturer, and it's a crime that he has to do wage labor right now. One of the long-term goals of Theory Underground has been now for a couple of years to hashtag free Mikey. That is something that I've been really pushing, but first, obviously, I have to get freed myself, so the two of us are able to do this because, you know, as Mikey said, build it and they will come. Well, I tried and I built a website and platform. I had my own app and everything, but it's been really buggy, and it's more than one person can handle. And that's, you know what, a really good lesson for me. And so for now, what we're doing is moving it to a temporary intermediary platform until we are able to get some more serious funding. And ultimately, we want to be in a place like this, a real brick and mortar digital nomadic mecca where people can come from all over the world. But also, the app was really expensive, and so by quitting it, I am now able to save a lot of money. And with the help of my patrons and the students at Theory Underground, especially the monthly subscribers, I am officially able to quit Amazon and do Theory Underground full time. So thank you so much, everybody. This is one huge step forward. With that said, several subscribers did not migrate from the now defunct app to the new setup, and I'm guaranteed to lose people over time. So please, if you want to get involved, become a subscriber. If you're not even sure what this is all about but are just curious, then I've added tier 0 and tier 1 for very basic kinds of access to what we are doing behind the scenes. If you don't have any time or energy to get involved, but you do have... All right, I cut the PSA short because we'll just play it again at the end of this stream anyway. So welcome back, everybody. We just had to touch base, make sure that we have everything that we want to say already said, and see what's remaining. And the main thing we want to close out on, like I said, we're kind of doing two birds, one stone, getting to have a conversation, talk about everything, but also syllabus day. So this is kind of the video that people can watch prior to the actual course. And so the course structure, it just takes place over the month of July. And it happens, here I'm going to make it very large on the screen for people with eyes on the screen, happens on July 6th, 13th, 20th, and 27th. Those are Saturdays in July at 12 p.m. Eastern time. 12 p.m. Eastern time. For some reason, I thought it was like later, but that's the time, right?
Yeah.
That's the time.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. Well, that's great. Works perfect for me. So let's talk about this course structure a little bit. Mikey?
Well, basically, we're going to have four lectures, right? And each one is going to be devoted to, if you look in the seminar 11, right? Go to the...
I have it, Mikey. So it's the sections are, so there's an initial section called excommunication, but I'll blend that in with the first section, which is called unconscious and repetition. And then there's a section called gaze as objet a. And then there's a section called transference and the drive. And then there's a final section called field of the other and back to the transference. So you can see that the four fundamental concepts, which are unconscious, repetition, transference, and drive, are all in two sections. And then there's two other sections. The gaze as objet a kind of stands out as the second section. But we'll go chronologically through the book, not just focused on the four fundamental concepts as Lacan articulates them.
Do you think that, like, and by the way, when I called on Mikey to talk about that, I meant more like the structure of like how long the different sessions, but we'll come right back to that. I wanted to ask, do you think that the like objet not being one of the four fundamental concepts is kind of like Lacan joking around? Like, is it?
No, I think he's saying it's so important it's not even one of the fundamental concepts.
Okay.
That's what I think he's saying. I think he's saying, I mean, it could be a joke. He was funny, so it's
Yeah.
possible that it's a joke. But I think, I mean, for one thing, it's not it is the title of the course is Four Fundamental Concepts of Psychoanalysis, and it's not a Freudian concept, right? Like
Mm.
all those other concepts come from Freud. Unconscious, repetition, transference, drive, they all come from Freud, right? But objet doesn't. There's no, and it'd be it's very hard. People have tried to do it to see a harbinger of objet in Freud's work, but it doesn't really exist. So I think it's more that than comedy. But comedy, I like the idea.
Okay.
Right, but because Lacan said objet is the one thing I have created.
I have invented
his concept, and you can't just get it from Freud. But okay, Dave, you want to talk more about the structure, or you want me to go into my question?
Yeah, because you kind of have a vision, or you had a desire for like how
Well, I mean,
these.
look, part of it is like this course is a dream come true for me. Like Dave asked me when Theory Underground started, like, hey, if you could have one person teach one course, what would it be? I go, oh, but hands down, I want Todd to teach Seminar 11. So this is kind of my baby. I've wanted this course to happen for years now. So I just have to say that. Second is I love Todd because Todd is a lecturer, right? If you watch his YouTube videos, Todd gives lectures and breaks down concepts, which in a lot of continental philosophy circles is a rarity nowadays. I blame D&G for a lot of that. But look, like it is like just because somebody lectures is they're in this position of authority. I would hope so after reading something for 20 years that they would know more about it than me. This is where I think the critique of authority is stupid, basically. We can't have somebody lecture because that puts them in a higher. I fucking hope so.
Yeah.
Right. Like, so that's the whole point is like, we love lecture based learning. We always wanted lectures. We always sought out lectures when we weren't able to go to school. Who taught us Heidegger? Well, we're getting Hubert Dreyfus's lectures. Who taught us Marx? We're getting David Harvey and Richard Wolff's lectures on Capital, right? Like we're always seeking out lectures. So we know, as you know, once having been young guys trying to learn theory, we need lectures to learn it. And so Todd's going to lecture from an hour to hour and 15 minutes, something like that. And then I'm going to prepare 3 like follow-up questions each week that I have from the reading. And then the rest of the time, you know, the students will get to ask questions.
Beautiful. Yeah, so. And I will be republishing my In Defense of Lectures and Against Students Supposed to Know piece. I had originally published it on the website, but it's not been available for the last 6 months. So I'm going to be republishing it to my Substack this week because I was about to share the link in the chat and then I was like, that's not accessible to anybody. But yeah, the student supposed to know is like it's obviously a playoff of the idea of the subject supposed to know and teachers who treat students like they're supposed to know, like that's the thing I'm playing with there. But anyway, no, I there's nothing better than a lecture when you're working. And we are just assuming people who are working in warehouses, driving trucks, whatever, so.
Well, I have to say, guys, that I listen to lectures on everything while I'm working too. So, I mean, it's not like I'm in an exceptional position. So when I'm taking a walk, when I'm like just trying to think through something, I'm constantly listening to, I've like, for my life, I've sacrificed music basically for the sake of like intellectual development. I mean, it wasn't the greatest sacrifice, but I kind of liked it. And now I basically never listen to music. So, but it's because of this, like when I'm doing any exercise I'm doing it to a lecture. So I think, it's not this masculine, like I'm the lecturer in the exceptional position. It's the feminine, not all. Like I'm also part of the ones that is.
No, you're the one lecturing because you've spent enough time tearing with your own lack in it that you can.
That's true. That's true. I have spent a lot of time with this book. That is true. That is true.
So okay, the last thing I really want to do is just give the listener a brief sketch of each one of these core fundamental concepts, right? So we got transference, we've got the unconscious, and we have drive and repetition. So I would love if you would paint a picture of each one. I want to say, just to start, maybe we can start with this. Repetition seems to be an essential aspect of drive. So with these two in particular, why are they separate? Why does, I mean, because you could think of drive just carrying repetition as part of its own concept, and then a fourth one could have been, I don't know, symptom or something. Why do you think he separates repetition and drive?
I don't know. Dave and I had this conversation about a month ago. I have no idea. Like,
Really?
I literally have no idea. And in fact, I think it's just an error on his part. And I think it's a little bit, here's what I think it is. I think the fourth concept is alienation or separation or subjectivity, right? Like, I think because that's what sticks out about this seminar, right? Like, there's this whole discussion of the subject's alienation and then the move to separation. And in fact, that is idiosyncratic to this seminar. So if you want to talk about that and Lacan, you have to talk about it in the seminar. He never talks about alienation or separation anywhere else. Zero.
So another hapax, in a sense.
Nice. Another hapax, exactly. So I think here's my little pet theory that I think he reduplicates. I love the word reduplicates because it itself reduplicates. Like, you could just say duplicates and it kind of, but it reduplicates the drive, right? Like, drive is repetition. Sorry. Like if you read Beyond the Pleasure Principle, it's clear Freud's thinking there's 3 chapters on the way the subject repeats, right? And then he's like, there's this thing called death drive, maybe, right? And so it's clear he's derived it from repetition. It's not separate. Not separate in any way. So here's my little theory that Lacan had an incredible anxiety of influence about not just Heidegger, but about philosophy as such, right? And so subjectivity and alienation are Hegelian, that's the root of Hegelian philosophy. And I think he did not want to anchor himself in Hegelian philosophy. And I think if he wanted again, for an anti-Hegelian reason, like he didn't want Hegelian triplicity. And I think he wanted 4, and I think he had to come up with another one. And I don't think there is a justification for it in any way. There's no justification for separating repetition from drive, because there might be in certain other, like, object relations psychoanalysts, right, who reject drive anyway. So it's interesting. So Hillary's working with some different object relations analysts, and whenever a project comes to them that's about death drive or drive, they're like, we don't believe in this. We're not. And I said, you should say back to them, okay, you might not believe in death drive, but don't worry, it believes in you. But anyway, I think that I don't see how in Lacan's own theorizing repetition and death drive could possibly be separated. I just think it's not thinkable, and there's no time when he theorizes repetition outside of drive. So Mikey, I think it's just the great question about this seminar, which is going to be unanswerable in my classes because it is just unanswerable, is why that's the fourth. And I think the reasons are complex, and I think ties back to this not wanting to use objet. It's connected to subjectivity and the anxiety of influence about philosophy, but I don't think it's answerable finally.
All right, before we talk about the other, I kind of just want to give my commentary on what you said about repetition.
Good. Say it. Maybe you have the answer. I want to hear.
Well, no, so look, here's my thing. The thing that I appreciate about Todd's work so much is that I think you own up to something that Lacan and Zizek disavow, which is they are existentialists. And I know the main book of yours that I want you to publish, I know you've talked about it on your podcast. So Existential Psychoanalysis. Like, we all are dying for this book eventually because you own up to the fact, like, Zizek's an existentialist, Lacan's an existentialist. They don't want to own this because of whatever philosophical reasons, but everybody who's listening, right? You guys can go, okay, but what's the, okay, we repeat ourselves and somehow it's connected to death drive. Here's what this boils down to in our everyday lives. We all have ways, or we can even call them habits, colloquially speaking. Let's talk about them as habits. They're not habits, but we'll just go with that for now. We have cyclical patterns or habits that we repeat all the time, and these things are stubborn, they're insistent. It's like we can't get a hold of them. They control us, we don't control them. And even though we hate that these things are part of our lives, we unconsciously are getting enjoyment from them. We're getting off via the friction, the negative stimulations, the problems that they give us, right? And so repetition isn't this abstract thing. It's something in your life that you wish you could get rid of, but for whatever reason, you just find yourself doing it over and over and over again. And this is an existential issue for us, right? It's us dealing with some sort of repetitious pattern that gives us enjoyment, but enjoyment in this self-destructive sense, where at this conscious level, we wish we could get rid of it, we could go away, but we are unconsciously hooked on it. And so our very existence in our world, our being in the world, so to speak, has this aspect of libidinal investment, which is to say, there's things that we are deeply hooked on, that we cling to, various activities, repetitious patterns. We wish we could get rid of them. We find that we can't. They in a sense, they have the potential to ruin our lives if they get so out of control with the repetition that we can't do anything. And this whole thing about repetition and death drive, this is one of the most existential things that affects all of our lives. So gambling can get out of control, overeating, binge drinking, getting fired from your job, self-destructive relationships. Everything that Todd just said about repetition and death drive, this is its concrete manifestation, these core issues that all of us face. And so to understand this aspect of our existence that is virtually unconscious, like this is where, like normal phenomenology, this is like almost a blind spot for it, and where psychoanalysis has to come in and inform. Once psychoanalysis starts to point it out to you, it phenomenologically starts to light up. You start to see it all over the place. But on your own, like it's unconscious for a reason, right? And so I just want to say this stuff on repetition and drive, this is so important to everything that we deal with in our lives, with habits or patterns that we wish we could get rid of. We don't seem to be able to figure out how to free ourselves from them, and that's what's at stake with repetition and drive.
Yeah. Why aren't you teaching this class again? I'm not sure.
Well, I learned all this from you. Like this is no, it's trickle down theory. This is trickle down theory. Lacan gave it to Milliere. Milliere gave it to Zizek. Zizek gave it to McGowan. McGowan gave it to Mikey.
Okay.
It's Mikey.
So it's Ronald Reagan's theory of how theory works. No, I just want to say a couple things about that. Like, because so I was talking to Hillary this morning, and she's like, people wouldn't think that death drive applies to you because whatever, you've written books, you've actually done things. She said, but you're actually the person the most enthralled in it. And it's through things that you wouldn't think, like I've destroyed myself in large part physically by exercise, which you think like, no, exercise is how you make yourself better. I managed to turn it into something that made me worse. And by work, right? Like basically work, I turned into this is probably not that uncommon, like into a self-destructive enterprise, right? So I think I totally agree with that. Even the things that seem best for us, we can make them into things that are terrible for us. The second thing I want to say is it's the only time Slavo has ever gotten a little bit upset with me is when I said to him, look, basically you're a Sartrean plus the unconscious. And he just is like, no, I have nothing in common with him. Nothing. Like he raised his voice to me. He was not happy. And he's incredible. He's always generous.
Didn't that indicate something very profound to him?
That's what I thought. I even said, methinks the lady doth protest a little too much. But no, he just was like, no. He tried to play it down. But I think I think it's interesting. Like, I think, and Lacan, the anxiety of influence is immense, right? Like, it's it's bald even that he felt like Sartre was just this shadow weighing him. I guess shadows don't weigh anything, but this shadow cast over him.
Yeah.
So I think that, I think I totally agree with that.
I just think that if you ever get around, I know this is your big project, and it's like, will you ever finish it? I don't know, but the point is, it would be a huge contribution to theory, because it would be, first off, you started off as an existentialist. That's your background. Same with me, right? Like, I love Lacanian psychoanalysis for the same reason you do, because I started off as an existentialist, and I think there's just nobody better to explain like Sartre and Heidegger and how it relates to Lacan. So I really hope you
let's wait till Slavoy's,
okay,
in his dotage.
But no, so yeah, and here's the thing, what you're talking about, because I relate to it too. Like my death drive, a lot of times it's not the manifestations. It's not these cinematic moments. Like you have these great examples of like the end scene of Michael Clayton, where there are these moments where somebody, they have such an impulse, they have such a a stubborn insistence that they have to hold to, that ultimately destroys their life. It brings their career crashing down. It destroys their social identity, right? And yet they have to cling to it, even though it destroys their identity. But more and more, like how it works for all of us on a non-cinematic level is we find points in our lives that are sources of the too much. So exercise is great, but you did it too much.
Too much, right?
Doing theory is great, but you did it too much, right? Same with me. Like theory is something I do too much. And so that's the thing. I think because whenever we talk about jouissance, we think of it, oh, it's a fiery blaze of petrol, to talk like Lacan. And honestly, somebody can be sitting in a coffee shop, like I'm thinking of me. I can be sitting in a coffee shop, apparently just calm, cool, and collected. And yet the intensity of the repetition, it's not manifesting itself, but nonetheless, it's this stubborn insist, I have to do this or I'll lose it. And everything else ends up being sacrificed for this impulse in me. Dude. That at a conscious level, half the time I'm like, I don't want to do that. Ego, why am I here? This is like, can I get a break from this? But something in me propels me into this repetitious circuit.
Like Dave with his 24-hour streams, right?
Yeah. No, this is actually
his organizing activity is a source of his too much. It
is. Yeah. That's what I was just gonna say. Is like my like the pleasure principle, my fantasy. I know what it is. It's doing what you do, sitting there in the coffee shop, just reading, doing the active leisure thing. Like, oh, I'm reading, and instead, it's like I'm always putting off the reading because I'm always like, no, I just got to like one more email, just this other thing. And it's just like work. And then I'm like, oh my God, I want to fucking read. And then I never actually get to it. I mean, I do, but not nearly as much as I want to. And so I'm always beating myself up for it. But we're about to switch gears here into the exit. We're on our way out. Any final things on the course before we bring up this final thing?
No, I think we covered it. No, go ahead.
We didn't really talk about unconscious and transference, but I mean, look, I think everybody has some sense of what the unconscious is. Lacan's got his unique interpretation of it, but anybody who the unconscious, the Freudian unconscious is a very common idea with a lot of people. So there's that. Transference is basically what we're talking about. It's where you position somebody as the person who knows everything. Zizek extends it to the person who enjoys, the person who believes. He has these other ways of extending what transference is, but ultimately it's you having an investment that this person has some specific or this privileged access to knowledge that can solve your problem, solve the problems you're dealing with, and you end up having a overestimation and over investment in this person because of it.
That is perfect. And now I'll just say, like, there's a thing I wanted to talk about throughout all of this, but we kind of left Heidegger behind, and I was like, well, we spent too long on him anyway. In the course, I'll end up like bringing it up though, and that is just like, I can't think what it means to do extimacy without thinking about the ecstatic nature of being in the world, and specifically what that means to be in a referential totality of equipment, right? So what does that all mean? And how does Heideggerian semiotics relate to Saussurean? And of course, Lacan goes much more Saussurean, but also with extimacy. There's something here with that unconscious that I'll want to bring up. We'll talk about it later. But the one on transference is probably the most important for people who are super online, and that's all of us today. Come on. And that is when we use the word parasocial. Todd and I talked about this already, but basically parasocial relationships are where the transference has occurred, but there's no real possibility for breaking that transference. And so that's important for critical media theory. I'll just leave it at that. We'll hopefully get way more into it in July. But for now, look, I want Mikey to say something about his book. He just sent the transcript to me and this morning, so we can finally start copy setting or typesetting. There'll be a pre-sale available soon. So I want you to say something about that. But before we do that, Catrone, Todd, you did a great job coming on the show.
No, you're not happy, man. You thought I sucked. Let's be clear. I'll do better next time. You're not going to give me a chance, though. You're not going to give me a chance.
So that's the thing. I haven't told anybody else on the channel this yet, but I told Todd I'm not going to give him another chance to talk to Catrone, that next time I'm going to bring on Mikey to represent Todd.
No, this is news to me, and I turn it down. Todd, you got it. You've got the next one.
I'll be tougher. I was too wimpy.
Look, here's what we need.
You guys had me with all this like conversation and all this. Like you were all trying to put. You were like you didn't want it to be a conflictual kind of thing, and so I was trying to play along.
Here's the thing, Todd. At some point, what I know what Dave has got spinning in the back of his head. He wants you and I together to basically have what we call a converdiction, right? With two Marxists. So you and I talk to two Marxists, and we'll represent the Lacanian, Zizek'ian side of things, and then we'll talk to them. And the debate is this: does political economy necessitate libidinal economy? We say yes, they say no. And that's what it boils down to.
Okay.
I would love to do that with Catrone and Doug Lane, or Catrone and Ashley Frowley. I don't know.
Ashley Frowley, there's some options, but yeah.
Anyway, all right, but we'll hopefully do that in October. I don't know. I think that's probably when it's going to happen. Russ is going to be doing a debate with Graham Harmon at the conference for the TUCon 2024 at the end of October. By the way, today is the actual cutoff for proposals to be included in TUCon 2024. And so go to the website, theoryunderground.com, get on it right now. You can just throw together a proposal if you want to have a shot at being in it. All right. But I'm sorry, there has to be a cutoff someday, and it's today. So anyway, Mikey, say something about your book and we'll close this out.
Okay. So here's the official title of the book. It's called Capital versus Time Energy, a Zizek'ian critique of Nick Land. And I at first was hesitant to call it Zizek'ian because I felt like there wasn't enough Zizek in it. But after having written 2 entire chapters that are basically just Zizek versus Land, and then Zizek being sprinkled out throughout the whole text, and then Lacan being there and Todd being there, and I'm like, this is, and the whole point is this was my dream course. You've made this happen. We're going to get it. My dream debate is Zizek versus Land. You've tried, hasn't happened yet, but we're not giving up on it. But this book is at this point, because look, I sent Dave and Ann the manuscript. They have it. In the coming weeks, I'm going to send these 3 remaining sections that I don't have done yet, but I'm sending it to them so they can get to work on it. This thing is probably going to be like 150,000 words long when it's all done. And it's just me engaging with Nick Land's work from a Lacanian, Zizek'ian, McGowan perspective. And my whole thing, yes, there's times where I bring in Wittgenstein and I bring in Heidegger and like I bring in these other thinkers um, to argue with Land through, right? But my whole thing is, I am a Zizekian, right? This is this perspective I view everything. And when I say Zizekian, it's this Lacan, Todd, it's Dwayne. All of them are part of what I mean by Zizekian, right? And that is my philosophical, default setting now. And so it is a Zizekian critique of Land. And so, but it's a lot of other things. No one has ever actually written a secondary, or introductory text on Nick Land, on the
100%.
CCRU.
100%.
And it's crazy. Like, these guys had, on their side of the internet, they're just as big and influential as Todd and Zizek and on this. And so, because I was a student at the News Center and I was absorbing accelerationism and getting all this, like, I've always been caught between these two sides of the predominant influences of online theory. It's the Lacan Zizek side, and it's the Deleuze, Guattari, Nick Land, CCRU. And I've always been caught in the middle, so to speak. I side with the Lacanian stuff, right? But I also see, like, there's stuff in D&G, I go, yeah, that's right. There's stuff in Land, I go, yeah, that's right. And so I've always been struggling, like, how do I, not balance it, but how do I give them their due while still being a Lacanian Zizekian, right? And so part of the book is just me working through it. Part of it is just trying to introduce Nick Land for people who don't know who the hell he is and why he's basically a cult philosopher. And I don't even mean that in, like, he has a cult status in a way that your typical philosophy professor doesn't have. And in a sense, I'm trying to demystify it. I'm saying, here's what was going on with this guy. Here's what he's doing now. And so, yeah, it's trying to kill 5 birds with 1 stone. Be an introduction to Nick Land, hyperstitionally try to push forward getting the two of them to debate, engaging in a Zizekian theoretical critique of Land, also challenging Nick Land on his politics, from some sort, like, it's a bunch of
it's all of these things. It's all these things.
It's all these
And
things.
and by the way, Mikey's course Intro to Land is the only one that just keeps getting enrollees, like, after the fact. Like, all the other courses at Theory Underground, maybe once or twice they'll sell in, but no, like, Mikey's just got this kind of constant feed of people trickling into that course. The intro lecture, the lecture 1, the one where you do, like, this whole history of libidinal materialism, has 16,000 views at this point, I think, maybe 17,000. And it's just going up because people are looking for some answers. They're trying to figure out what's going on with all of this stuff. So I think you're doing something, your fingers, you're on a nerve. And I feel like Land's silence at this point tells us that there's some other kind of a nerve that we're also touching, because he said he would get back to us after vacation in January. And so it's June now, and I sent him an email like right before we left on tour, and I said, "Hey, are you back from vacation yet? I've sent you a couple of emails, but at this point, it's just starting to seem like maybe you don't really want to do it." And anyway, with all that said, you taught the Land course. Now you're teaching the Zizek course in October? No, September. At Theory Underground. And then next year you're doing Zizek versus Land, like an actual course on Zizek versus Land.
I'm going to do a course. It is kind of like this hybrid thing of, like, okay. And basically I've done all the work for it in the book, but I'm going to teach what are the core differences between the Hegelian, Lacanian, Zizekian, McGowan, this whole side, right, of the internet, and what between that side of the online theory space and this other side, which is Spinoza, Nietzsche, D&G, Land, CCRU, that whole thing, right? And so I'm going to basically try to dwell, like, in lieu of a debate. I'm just going to teach the debate itself, and it would bring these two. It's basically CCRU versus Ljubljana School.
All right. And so when I roll the PSA here in a second, everybody, I do have a thing about the monthly membership subscription thing that you can do. It makes it so that I don't have to work at Amazon. Well, we're going to be setting one up for Mikey. And so there's going to be, like, the ongoing Mikey seminars on Land, on Zizek, on all of these other things, Lyotard, Baudrillard, all of it. Eventually classical and modern philosophy as well. And because he's got his basis in all of that. I just want to put that out there. Stay tuned. That's coming soon. This is the first time I've announced most of this stuff, right? Like I think we just announced like 4 things most people have never heard about. All right. Now with all that said, I just felt like we had to announce it at some point. So thanks for bearing with us, Todd. Any sort of closing thoughts on the way out here?
No, I mean, I've never taught just a class on Seminar 11. So I thanks for asking me to do it. I had a nice restful summer planned and now that got you nicely.
Well, we'll be the source of your too much.
which Hillary was like, why did you agree to that? Did you just want to disrupt your nice summer? And clearly I did. So I'm really looking forward to it. And I think it'll be pretty fun. And I'll try to bring my B+ game to it.
Well, we're very happy to be the source of your too much.
Thanks so much, Todd.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Take care, guys.
Bye.
Great talking to you.
Later.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Welcome to Theory Underground, a place for workers with earbuds who are tired of the bullshit and just want to get down to it. Big ideas, rigorous thinking, and ultimately liberation from necessity.
Research at Theory Underground focuses on what is most important for understanding our current situation. Theory of the subject, capital, time-energy theory, critical media theory, CMT, and the most essential critiques necessary for understanding why the theory, ideology, and common sense of influencers left to right misses the mark.
Theory Underground is coming to a city near you. Besides a commitment to publishing certain underground theorists and popularizing certain fundamental concepts, we have toured the United States and are touring Europe to promote our ideas, courses, and publications. You've been reading Underground Theory.
Amazing book. I'm a publisher and an editor. I run a review of books. Literally, it's my living. This is the best edited collection I've ever read.
Okay, picture this scene. America, early 2021. An Amazon warehouse worker arises from the emerging underground theory internet scene to create spaces for untimely topics and concerns that are too often neglected or kept in isolation today. Joined by a revolving cast of underground theorists, academics, and critics, he establishes what will become Theory Underground, a teaching, research, and publishing platform by and for working class intellectuals, autodidacts, and academics who want to do more than they're able to do within the confines of academia. That warehouse worker's name is David McKerracher, and his book Time Energy is his first major contribution to the world of theory. It was recently reprinted with a foreword by none other than Slavoj Žižek, who also contributed to Theory Underground's latest book.
My Bible, it's an excellent book.
A collection of essays called Underground Theory.
What you just heard is an excerpt from the Strange Exiles podcast, episode 23, where Bram from Strange Exiles interviewed me and Mikey. For those who don't know, Mikey is the author of the Dangerous Maybe blog. We are publishing one of his books here shortly at Theory Underground. He's also a lecturer at Theory Underground, and he's someone I've been friends and a collaborator with for over 10 years. But most importantly for you all, he's a fantastic lecturer, and it's a crime that he has to do wage labor right now. One of the long-term goals of Theory Underground has been now for a couple of years to hashtag free Mikey. That is something that I've been really pushing, but first, obviously, I have to get freed myself, so the two of us are able to do this because, as Mikey said, build it and they will come. Well, I tried and I built a website and platform. I had my own app and everything, but it's been really buggy and it's more than one person can handle, and that's, a really good lesson for me. And so for now, what we're doing is moving it to a temporary intermediary platform until we are able to get some more serious funding. And ultimately, we want to be in a place like this, a real brick and mortar digital nomadic mecca where people can come from all over the world. But also, the app was really expensive, and so by quitting it, I am now able to save a lot of money, and with the help of my patrons and the students at Theory Underground, especially the monthly subscribers, I am officially able to quit Amazon and do Theory Underground full time. So thank you so much, everybody. This is one huge step forward. With that said, several subscribers did not migrate from the now defunct app to the new setup, and I'm guaranteed to lose people over time. So please, if you want to get involved, become a subscriber. If you're not even sure what this is all about but are just curious, then I've added tier 0 and tier 1 for very basic kinds of access to what we are doing behind the scenes. If you don't have any time or energy to get involved, but you do have some money to help support this project from afar, then please check out the Patreon. My patrons over at Patreon make the podcast and public YouTube possible. Thank you. As for once-in-a-lifetime events, check out the new poster for the American Idiots Theory Underground European Book Tour. Paris, Brussels, Berlin, Vienna, Linz, Krakow, Glasgow, London, and Oxford from April 27th to May 25th, 2024. 2 events are already fully booked out. Save a seat at an event by getting in contact with us ASAP. Finally, the call for proposals to our conference in Mexico.
What's up, everybody? TUCon 2024 update here. It's not happening in Mexico anymore, but it is still happening on October 24th through the 27th.
The change was made because a lot of the people that wanted to attend and that were expected to attend said they could probably afford to travel if they had more time advance notice. So save up for June 2025.
If you have to choose, right? Because this one that is happening this year is happening physically in Boise, Idaho, because we have a lot of collaborators and fellow travelers and co-instructors there. But you can attend virtually for this one. You won't be able to attend virtually next year. So yeah, if you have to choose, attend physically in 2025. The call for proposals already happened. The writing workshop for proposals already happened. You can still get the links to both of those. Just shoot us a message and ask for those links. We'll get you those. And the form goes live on June 1st, and the deadline is June 15th. So if you're attending physically, let me know ASAP.
Get in on it.
All right. Finally, last little thing here is to say thank you so much to my patrons over at Patreon. The Patreon is for people who are too busy to be students or subscribers at Theory Underground, but who want to see more of this free content on the podcast and YouTube channel for Theory Underground. You are the ones who see something of value in the free content being made available here, and you want to see more of it. Your patron pledges at Patreon are a real motivator for me. So thank you so much, especially to Marilyn Lawrence, Bert Vanderkar, Carl Vanderlip, Nikolai, Sakil, Zoxandra, Darian, Max, Al, Alagiri, Ben, as well as several others including Core Atlantic, Louis or Louise, Matt Payne, Neil, Simon, and Yiz.